snow dusted the church roof like sifted sugar, resting untouched and soft, as if mocking the hard edges hiding beneath. The morning air bit like broken glass. It followed Willa Greystone as she stepped from the wagon's shadow, her boots sinking into half-melted slush. Her breath coiled into the cold, pale and lingering, and the black veil clung damp to her cheeks. One hand cradled her belly, shielding it from the chill and from the stares already gathering behind frost-blurred windows. The church doors moaned open. She entered, and silence met her like a closing door. No one stood. No one whispered a greeting. They only stared, faces stiff within their Sunday collars, hands folded not in reverence, but in quiet, bitter judgment. Willa walked, slow and steady, her spine straight beneath her worn coat. The pews creaked as shoulders turned away. A child was drawn tighter to a mother's side. The reverend shifted behind the pulpit. Even the stained glass light seemed to dim as she made her way down that aisle, her steps alone. Each footfall rang out like something being confessed. She'd come to bury a man. Tom Greystone hadn't been a good man, but he'd been her husband. And even with the bruises that clung to memory like old shadows, she had stayed. Stayed until the fight in that gambling tent ended him. She hadn't cried, not right away. Not until the letter came, half-scribbled and aching. Bury me proper, Willa. Let me rest near God, not gamblers. The gamblers had shown more kindness than the congregation ever had. She reached the front and turned to face them. Her veil stayed down, though the heat of their stares nearly seared through it. The reverend cleared his throat. "We are gathered." He faltered, eyes dropping. Then rising again, voice thinner than before. "We are gathered to commit Thomas Greystone to rest." No amens followed. Not a single mourner behind her. Just the scrape of one boot. Then stillness. A cough broke the silence. A whisper followed. "That ain't even his child." Another voice, louder this time. "She wears shame like a ribbon." Willa lifted her chin, barely. Not defiance. Just the last thread of dignity, stretched but unbroken. Her hand returned to her swollen belly, 8 months full. The child stirred gently, like a soft tap from within. A reminder. "I'm still here." The reverend faltered. His hands trembled around the prayer book. "If no one stands witness." The sentence hung in the air, unfinished. Willa turned to face the crowd. Her voice, when it came, was soft and ragged with exhaustion. "I'll stand. I'm enough." A stir rippled through the pews, shock, disdain, discomfort. The words weren't meant to be true. A woman alone wasn't supposed to claim enoughness. Not here. Not this way. And then a chair scraped in the very back row. Boots stepped forward with slow certainty. The man who wore them was tall, square-shouldered, but lean like someone who'd fought more winters than he'd won. His coat was patched, his jaw unshaven, but his eyes, dark, steady, never wavered. Eben Rourke. Some folk whispered that name in saloons with smirks. Others muttered it with pity. A rancher with more land than luck. Widowed, too young. Lived alone out east of the creek, where grass barely grew. He walked past the pews, past the glares, past Mrs. Penelope Kitcham's scandalized gasp, all the way to the front. He looked at Willa, nodded once. Then to the reverend. "She ain't alone." The reverend blinked. "You're standing with her?" Eben looked back at the crowd, then turned forward again, voice rough but unwavering. "She's my wife." The church fell silent. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. Willa's breath caught. Her knees threatened to buckle. But his hand found her elbow. Not possessive, not forceful. Just steady, solid. The reverend swallowed. "I see." A hymn was sung half-heartedly. The prayer was read. Thomas Greystone's name spoken with embarrassed reverence. No bell tolled. But Willa stood between two men, one dead, one living, and felt something unspoken shift. They left before the final benediction. Outside, Eben opened the wagon door and helped her up. She hesitated. Why? He didn't answer at first. Took the reins. Climbed in beside her. The horse began to pull them away from the church. Snowflakes danced in the air like feathers from some invisible pillow fight above. "I know what it's like," he said finally, "to bury someone with no one watching." Willa looked down at her lap. Her gloved fingers trembled slightly. "I didn't ask you to stand," she murmured. "No. You didn't owe me that." "No." They rode in silence a while longer, the wind whispering through pine and winter-slick grass. The town behind them shrank to shadows. "You're not really my wife," he said, "but they'll think you are. And that helps." Might. He adjusted the reins. Might not. The horse pulled harder as the trail turned uphill. Willa stared at the trees, bare, brittle, and honest in their nakedness. She whispered, "I was 16 when I was sold to them. Tom. He wasn't cruel, not always. Just loud. And broken. I never got to be anything before I was his." Eben said nothing. The silence, again, was not cruel. They reached his ranch as twilight began its descent, a crooked house leaning into wind, fences half-mended, a porch that groaned under its own weight. But the chimney breathed smoke, and the door opened without protest. Inside smelled of pine and old leather. A single room for living, a side room for sleeping. A cradle half-carved in one corner. Dust motes danced in the lamplight. Eben gestured to a chair. "You can sit there. I'll heat something." She lowered herself slowly. Her back ached. The child within her twisted gently, as if sensing the change. Her eyes scanned the room, simple, worn, but clean. No woman's touch lingered here. Not anymore. He returned with a bowl of soup. Set it beside her. No words. As she ate, he sat across the room, whittling something from a block of wood, quiet, rhythmic strokes that did not pry. The silence between them was different now. It stretched, but didn't pull apart. It held. After a while, she said, "You didn't hesitate. Back there." He glanced up. "Didn't need to." "Why not?" He shrugged. "You were drowning. I had a rope." Her eyes filled, just for a moment. She wiped them quickly. The clock on the wall ticked soft and steady. After the meal, she helped gather the dishes. He tried to stop her. She insisted. She paused at the cradle in the corner. "Yours?" she asked. He nodded once. "Was." She didn't press. He didn't explain. Later, as she lay on the bed, he offered. He took the old chair by the fire. She stared at the ceiling, hand on her stomach. Outside, the wind howled, but the room stayed warm. She whispered to the quiet, to no one and everyone, "Don't take this from me too." The baby kicked. Eben stirred, but didn't wake. Morning would come, and with it more gossip, more glances. But for now, the snow fell, and inside, two souls who had long forgotten how to trust lay within reach of one another, not touching, not speaking, but not alone. And somewhere in that silence, hope put down roots. The morning after Willa Greystone arrived at the Rourke Ranch, the wind had lost its sharpness. Snow still blanketed the world, but the air had quieted, as if the land itself were holding its breath. She woke to the scent of firewood and the low creak of floorboards beneath slow-moving boots. A sliver of early sun reached across the room, warm against the chill that lingered in the corners. Eben was already dressed, feeding the stove with methodical patience. He moved like a man used to silence, his hands speaking more than his voice ever did. When he noticed her sitting up, he nodded, nothing more. "There's coffee. I didn't know how you take it, so it's just strong." She wrapped the quilt tighter around her and rose slowly. Her back ached from sleep, but not unbearably so. The child within shifted, as if to remind her it was still waiting. Her eyes flicked to the chair where Eben had slept. A folded blanket rested neatly on it. He hadn't used the bed. That mattered more than she could say. She took the coffee, with a quiet thanks, and sat by the window. Outside, the land stretched empty and wide. Fences crooked. Trees brittle with frost. A lone chicken wandered near the barn door. Everything about the place looked like it had once hoped to grow, but hadn't. "I'll get water from the pump. If you're warm enough, we can talk about what needs doing." She nodded, unsure what that meant. He left without another word, the door clicking gently shut behind him. The inside of the house was plain but cared for. dust gathered in the corners, but nothing smelled of rot. A table with 3 chairs, one with a broken leg propped by a book. An old sewing kit unopened on the shelf. The carved cradle sat where it had the night before, still unfinished, its edges rough and waiting. It hadn't moved in years, by the look of it. By the time he returned with water, she had swept the hearth clean with an old broom and folded the blanket left behind. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know." He set the bucket down, eyeing her hands. "You all right?" Yes. She wasn't. Not really. But she would be. There was something steady about his voice, even when short, that gave her spine again. They didn't speak much that day. He showed her where the grain was kept, the barn layout, how to stoke the fire without choking the room with smoke. She listened, learned. She wasn't a fool, just a woman who'd had no say in her own life for too long. By evening, they ate together at the table. He said grace, brief and soft. She murmured an amen, though she hadn't prayed in months. Afterward, he reached beneath the table and pulled out a bundle of linens. "Thought you might want to start with the cradle," he said. She blinked. "You want it finished?" He nodded. "I carved it one a long time ago. Didn't have reason to pick it up again. Until now." Her fingers touched the edge, traced a groove like a half-finished heartbeat. She said nothing, but she took the linens and began cutting gently with scissors dulled by time. In the days that followed, a rhythm built between them, not fast, not easy, but something close to peace. They shared chores. She helped feed the animals, though Eben never let her lift the heavy buckets. She mended 2 of his shirts. He repaired the barn door. She almost knocked off its hinges. He spoke little. She didn't need him to. But the silence wasn't always kind. The townspeople didn't forget. Rumors traveled faster than wagons in winter. Mrs. Kitchum had been seen clutching her prayer book with enough fury to tear it. A young woman at the general store turned her face away when Willa walked past with a bag of coffee. The local blacksmith, once friendly, now nodded without meeting her eyes. Willa said nothing to Eben. She simply returned from town one day with her jaw set and her scarf pulled too tight. That night, as they sat in the amber glow of the lantern, she stitched the last edge of the cradle blanket. "She used to come by," she said suddenly. Eben looked up from his carving. "A woman. Left food sometimes. When I was with Tom, she'd leave it by the steps and knock. I never caught her name." He waited. "She stopped coming when I started to show. I think she believed I deserved what was happening." Eben set the knife down, not because he was done, but because she needed his full attention. "Do you believe that?" Willa shook her head slowly. "I did. Not anymore." He nodded. "Good." The fire crackled. She folded the blanket over her lap. "Why didn't you ever finish the cradle?" she asked. Eben leaned back. "My wife died giving birth. 7 years ago. The child didn't live either." Her breath hitched. "I'm sorry," she said. He shrugged, but the weight behind the motion didn't budge. "I buried them both. Church wouldn't take them then either. Said I hadn't registered the marriage proper. Said it was frontier vows and not legal." Her fingers curled tighter around the fabric. "I carved that cradle for a child who never came. I left it out so I'd remember why not to hope again." The words hung between them, raw as a wound left open to air. Willa reached over and placed the blanket gently into the cradle. "You carved it because you wanted to love someone. That's not a thing to be ashamed of." He didn't speak. His eyes found hers, and for once didn't look away. That night, when she rose from sleep with her back aching and the baby kicking too high under her ribs, she found the fire still lit and Eben sitting at the table, carving again. The cradle now held the blanket, and beside it a small wooden star. "I thought it should have a sky," he said, sheepish. She stood beside him, rested one hand on the cradle, the other on her belly. "It does now." By week's end, the storm hit harder. Snow covered the land deep as shoulders, and wind lashed against the shutters like a grieving widow. They stayed inside, rationing wood and sharing tea boiled down from pine needles. Willa laughed once, startled by the sound of it. Eben looked up from his cup, smiled faintly, then returned to sipping. The rhythm grew easier. She would never call it home. Not yet. But the quiet no longer felt like punishment. Still, gossip was a louder thing in absence. A traveler from town brought word. They're saying he married her to hide the shame. That child might be his, you know. Or maybe she's using him for shelter. Eben said little. Just chopped more wood. Sharpened his tools. Repaired a fence, even though the snow would knock it down again. Willa watched him from the window. The way he worked with care, not hurry. How he bore the weight of gossip, like someone used to carrying more than his share. She opened the door just as he returned from the woodpile. They're going to think what they think, she said. He paused, snow dripping from his brim. I didn't ask for protection, she continued. But I'm grateful. Not just for the roof, for being left in peace. He gave a small nod, then walked past her. Paused. You're not using me. And you're not rescuing me. He turned, eyes steady. No. Just making room for someone who needed it. Her breath caught at the simplicity of it. In the days that followed, she picked up her humming again. Small melodies from childhood that barely filled the room, but stayed in the air like the scent of baking. Eben didn't mention it, but he paused his work every time she did. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills and painted the snow in gold and bruised violet, she stood at the threshold and watched the horizon. There's going to be more talk, she said. I'll go if it makes things easier for you. He walked up beside her, glancing at the cradle through the window. Easier isn't always better. She looked at him, truly looked, into the weariness behind his eyes. The grief quietly coiled around his ribs. The hope he never admitted aloud. You think I belong here? He didn't answer. But when he went inside, he placed a second chair beside the stove. Closer than before. She stepped in after him, closed the door, and sat down. The world outside was still frozen, though spring loomed somewhere beyond the hills. The snow had receded in patches, leaving behind a field of mud and the fragile bones of old grass trying to wake. Birds had not yet returned. The mornings were still cold enough that Willa wrapped a shawl tight around her shoulders before rising, careful not to wake Eben where he slept in his chair. The baby had dropped lower in her belly. She felt it in the stretch of her back, the slow waddle of her walk, the way her lungs could breathe a little easier even as her feet swelled with the weight. It would be soon. Inside the cabin, the air was warm, clean. She kept the fire going now, without needing to ask. The cradle stood fully finished in the corner, draped in the blanket she had sewn. Eben had added 2 more stars above it, carved into the cradle's arching rail like a quiet sky. He changed, too. Not in speech, he still spoke little, but in presence. He brought her tea before she asked, built a step to help her reach the porch without stumbling, fixed the roof leak over the bed when she mentioned a drip, though she never heard him do it. He was a man who solved things in silence, who listened in motion. And Willa found herself watching him more than she meant to. She found herself humming again, sometimes without noticing. She caught him pausing when she did, his eyes lingering on her with something soft, something uncertain. Neither of them reached beyond that. Not yet. But they stayed close in the evenings, chairs drawn together near the stove, speaking in small notes, not declarations. It might have stayed that way if not for the letter. It came tucked into a parcel of supplies, carried up the trail by a red-cheeked boy who didn't meet Eben's eyes. He passed it over with a muttered word and left as fast as he came. Eben handed it to her. Willa opened it slowly, recognizing the looping scrawl of the Reverend. The church council met again. They voted against the installation of Thomas Greystone's name on the grave marker. Unwed pregnancy, prior reputation, and his manner of death were all cited. I'm sorry. I tried. She sat down hard. Her knees ached from standing too long, but this was something else. Something deeper. The words blurred for a moment. They won't let him be named, she said, voice tight. Eben leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets. She looked up at him. It wasn't just for him. That grave was a promise. It was me saying he mattered, that I mattered, that something we lived through still counted. They don't decide that, he said quietly. Don't they? Her voice cracked. If a name can be erased by a committee, what's left of us? What's left of anything? He didn't answer. Instead, that evening, he loaded his wagon without a word, hitched the mule, and rode into town alone. Willa waited by the window, hands pressed to her stomach, unsure whether to hope or dread. Hours passed. When he returned, his coat was soaked from sleet. His boots were caked in town mud. But he carried with him a plank of wood, roughly hewn, stained from smoke and work. He set it down on the table and took up his carving knife. Letter by letter, he etched the name, Thomas Greystone. No dates, no scripture, just the name. She stood beside him and placed her hand on his. His knuckles were scarred, worn from winter and years of silence. But they stilled under hers. He said nothing. He didn't need to. They planted the marker just outside the edge of the churchyard, where the trees met the fence, where snow still lingered in quiet heaps. Eben dug the hole. Willa knelt to lay the marker in. And together, they stood and watched as the sun slipped between the bare branches, catching the wood with a gentle glow. "I hope you rest easy," she whispered, "even if they won't say your name inside." Eben glanced at her. "He wasn't good to you." She nodded. "But he was mine, and I chose to remember the parts that were human." The next day, they found the barn door slightly open. Nothing stolen, nothing broken, but the prints in the mud were too many. Eben checked the loft, the feed, his traps, then walked to the edge of the property and found more tracks, deep, staggered, left by boots too polished to belong to local ranch hands. He came back inside with a coldness in his eyes Willa hadn't seen before. "You know them?" she asked. "No. But they know you." "Maybe." He didn't say more. But that night, after she'd gone to bed, she heard the unmistakable sound of metal being oiled. She crept out and saw him in the barn, lantern burning low, cleaning his rifle. He looked up when he heard her step. "You expecting trouble?" she asked. His hands moved with precision. Town's talking more. Some men came sniffing around the saloon, asking if I was being kept by a woman with a bastard child. Willa's chest went tight. They said that, laughed about it. He set the rifle down gently, not with anger, with purpose. "You didn't answer them?" she asked. He shook his head. "I've answered enough fools in my time." She stepped closer. "Are you afraid?" He met her gaze. "I'm angry. Not because of what they said, but because you think I'd be ashamed." She looked down at her hands. Her fingers had started to swell. Her belly pressed forward like a question. "I'm not ashamed," she said. "I'm just tired of walking into rooms like I'm already guilty." He stood slowly. "You ain't, and I don't care what they say. But I'll be damned if they come here thinking they can take something from you." She reached out and touched his arm. Not out of fear, out of understanding. He didn't flinch. They stood there in the low light of the barn, surrounded by tools and rope and the quiet tension of lives half spoken. "I'm not his," she said finally. "What?" "The child. It's not Tom's." His brow furrowed. He didn't move. "I was assaulted by one of his men. Tom laughed when I told him. Said it was good for business. Said I ought to be grateful someone still wanted me." Her voice didn't shake. It had already broken too many times. Eben exhaled slowly, his jaw clenched, then released. "You don't owe me that story." "I know. But I wanted you to hear it from me, not from town gossip." He nodded. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was sacred. They walked back to the house together, their shadows stretching long beneath the lantern's glow. 2 nights later, the confrontation came. Eben was outside feeding the animals when 3 men rode up, their horses restless, their faces smug. Town men, dressed better than they worked, full of drink and the cruelty of those who've never been denied. "Well now, Eben," one of them called. "Heard you took yourself a wife with some extra baggage." Eben didn't look up, didn't stop what he was doing. "She teach you how to lie real sweet? Or just too pretty for you to say no?" The others laughed. One dismounted, stepping closer. "We just thought you ought to know. Church is planning to vote on cutting your ties to the land if you keep harboring a WH." The word didn't finish. Eben straightened slowly. His hand didn't reach for his gun. He didn't yell. He just looked at them, steady, unblinking. "You boys drunk or just cruel?" Maybe both. Well, Eben said, voice low, then I'll ask you once, leave. The man spat in the dirt. Ain't like you can stop us. You're one man. One broken-down rancher. Eben took a slow step forward. You're standing in the place where my wife bled out and died trying to give me a child. You're breathing air that still remembers her voice. And you think I'm the one that's broken. The man faltered. Eben didn't move closer, didn't raise his tone. But if you stay here another minute, I'll show you what a man with nothing left to lose does with the last thing he loves. That landed. The others shifted in their saddles. The tension broke like frost under boot. They turned, muttered, rode off, spitting curses into the dark. Eben didn't move until the dust settled. Willa had watched from the window. She didn't cry. She didn't run out to thank him. She simply lit a second lantern and set it by the door. He came in and sat at the table, not looking at her. More will come, he said. I know. She poured him a cup of coffee, sat across from him. I'm not going anywhere, she said. He looked at her, then really looked. Her belly between them, her hand steady, her spine unbending. You shouldn't have to fight for me. You didn't ask me to. She touched the cradle gently. The baby kicked once, solid and strong. He watched the movement. Then, with a quiet breath, reached out. His fingers met hers. They stayed like that for a long time. No promises made, but something unspoken sealed. And though the wind howled outside and the lanterns flickered, the house held firm. The storm rolled in on the first morning of spring. Not the soft kind that sang of new grass and warm rains, but the angry, crooked sort, sky-heavy with bruised clouds and wind sharp as a whip. The air shifted. The barn creaked. Even the trees leaned away from the coming force. Inside the house, Willa's water broke before dawn. It wasn't like in stories. There was no scream, no drama, just a slow warmth between her legs and a tightening across her belly that made her press one hand against the wall and exhale through gritted teeth. Eben was already up, stoking the fire. He heard her, turned fast. One look at her face, and he nodded once, calm as ever. All right, he said. We've got this. She nodded, clutching the edge of the table as another wave came. The pain wasn't unbearable, yet, but it was coming fast, thick as thunder. I sent word to the midwife last week, he said, already gathering towels, boiling water, moving with the efficiency of someone who couldn't afford panic. Told her it'd be soon. She won't come, Willa said, teeth clenched. They've made up their minds about me. He looked at her, and she saw it then. His jaw tightened not in fear, but fury. Then she doesn't deserve to be here. She gasped, bent double. Her fingers dug into the table's edge as the next contraction seized her. Eben came beside her, steadied her with one arm. I've delivered calves, he said. I'll listen close. You tell me what you need. You, she said, through ragged breath. Don't leave. Not for anything. The hours stretched. The wind howled against the shutters. Rain slammed the windows like fists. Willa lay on the bed, sweat soaking her shift, hair clinging to her forehead. She screamed once, twice, then fell quiet. She was not a woman for theatrics. But the pain ripped through her like fire. Eben never left her side. He wiped her brow with trembling hands. He whispered steadiness when her strength faltered. When she wept, not for the pain, but for the shame, the fear, the memory of hands that had taken without asking. He said nothing, just held her hand tight. You're safe, he said. This child's coming into light, not shadow. And when the final push came, she screamed so loud it silenced the storm. Then, crying, high and sharp, pure as spring's first bell. A daughter. Eben held her like something holy. Red-faced, wrinkled, perfect. She stopped crying the second Willa's arms wrapped around her. The storm passed. Sunlight peeked through broken clouds. She named her Lark, because that morning, a bird sang outside the window, soft and defiant. For the first time, Eben laughed. Not a full-bodied sound, just a breathy, surprised thing from his chest, as if the weight he'd carried so long had loosened. She's small, he said. She's enough, Willa answered. That afternoon, they sat on the porch together, her in a blanket, The baby cradled against her chest, Eben beside them. The sun warmed the wet earth. Trees dripped. The land exhaled. They would have stayed like that if not for the knock. 3 sharp raps. A deputy stood at the gate, hat in hand, eyes lowered. "Church has called a vote," he said. "Land's in question. They're saying your marriage isn't legal, that you're harboring sin." Eben didn't move, just said, "And they'll speak it from the pulpit Sunday. Thought you should know." He nodded. "We'll be there." The deputy hesitated. "Not everyone agrees with them. Just so, you know." "Then they ought to speak louder." That night, Willa didn't cry. She wrapped Lark in the quilt she'd stitched from scraps and held her close. "I won't let them make her wear my shame," she said. "You won't have to," Eben answered. "We're walking in as we are. And if they can't see worth in that, they're the ones in need of saving." Sunday came clear and cold. Snow still clung to the north-facing slopes, but the fields were greening. Spring crept in whether the town liked it or not. Willa dressed in the same black coat she wore the day she buried Tom. But she left the veil. She carried Lark close against her chest, the baby wrapped in white. Eben wore his best shirt, which still had a patched elbow. He walked beside them without speaking. The church was full. Word had spread. Mrs. Kitchum sat stiff in the front pew, lips thin. The Reverend stood at the pulpit, brow furrowed. Murmurs buzzed low like hornets in the rafters. They walked up the aisle together. People shifted. Willa didn't look left or right. She walked like a woman who had buried shame and planted something better in its place. At the altar, she turned. The Reverend opened his mouth, but she spoke first. "I came here months ago with nothing but a name and a burden." Murmurs rippled. She raised her voice. "I was judged before I opened my mouth, cast out before I could kneel. This child was called a sin before she ever breathed." She paused, looking out at the rows of familiar, silent faces. "But she's light. And her voice broke slightly, "I'm not what you said I was." Eben stepped forward, voice steady. "She's my wife. In word, indeed. And if you need paper to prove it, you can burn the church down for all I care. We're not asking your blessing, just standing in truth." A man in the back muttered, blasphemy. But then another voice. A girl, no more than 15, rising from the pew with hands trembling. "She helped my ma," the girl said. "When Pa took sick, she stayed up 3 nights with us. Didn't ask for a thing." The room stilled. Then the blacksmith stood. "That boy she saved from the snow last month, he wouldn't be here if not for her." Voices joined, one by one, quiet but certain. The Reverend looked down, then lifted his gaze. "There's no sin in surviving," he said, "and no shame in raising a child born of pain into light." He stepped forward. "I won't vote against you. I'll baptize this child if you'll allow it." Willa nodded, handed Lark over with care. The baby squirmed once, then stilled in the Reverend's arms. He spoke the words. Holy water kissed her brow. A child born clean. Willa wept, not because she needed the church's blessing, but because, for once, the world gave something back. After the ceremony, the townsfolk didn't speak much, but they didn't turn their backs either. One woman left a basket on the porch that night, bread, soap, a blue bonnet. Another brought seeds for planting. Change came slow, but it came. That evening, as stars stitched themselves into the sky, Willa stood barefoot in the yard, Lark asleep against her shoulder. Eben came to her side, a mug of tea in each hand. She took it, drank, then leaned into him. "They'll forget what they said about me," she whispered. He nodded. "But the baby won't." She smiled. "Good. I want her to remember what she came from, how she was loved anyway." They stood that way a long time, watching night settle gently over the land. And though no songs played, no cheers rose, no ribbons flew, something holy wrapped around that porch. Not religion, not reputation, just truth. Love earned in silence. And one quiet baby who knew it all.